So we talked about yesterday about what this Labour strategy of the reset is with the EU, and it's very, very Ming Va's strategy about it. We're going to take it as gently, as slowly as we can, because really, until these negotiations actually start, which will be about April time, I think, next year, British government doesn't actually have to say what it wants. And bear in mind, I present to you what would have happened, for example, if a couple of months ago, Keir Starmer had been, doing the rounds as David Lammy would be doing in the EU, and they'd come back and said, "Yeah, we're doing a youth mobility scheme with Europe." Nigel Farage, right-wing press, etc., would have had field day after field day after field day going after them, saying Brexit betrayal, they're betraying you on this, they're doing this and this. And they would have had fuel for just throwing the fire for days and days and days, just keep on doing it. And it would have been like that for months on end. Meanwhile, of course, whenever they've tried to do that, say, oh, Brexit betrayal narrative, well, they've had nothing to really sort of go on. And this is why I talk about it as a reintroducing the British public to the idea of actually, no, see, we're working together with the EU again, getting them, rewarming the pot, as they say, for the British public to sort of working again with the EU. But then, as we've said before, attitudes are changing. And this is what we got this morning. And this is from a European EU think tank, which has done the numbers on this. Well, we've not only got Brits saying that they wouldn't mind this, we've also now got Europeans from Germany, France, Italy, Portugal saying the same thing. So, you know what I said, I'd be proved right by time? So, as always, before we go jumping into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, there is the Patreon page down below. There's the Buy Me Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button. And of course, as always, there is the Pony Club down below as well. So let's crack on then into this, coming from The Guardian with the title of Majority Now of Brexit Voters Would Accept Free Movement to Access Single Market. So let's crack on then into this. So a majority of Britons who now voted to leave the EU would accept a return of free movement in exchange for access to the single market, according now to a European cross study that also found reciprocal desires now in member states for now closer links with the UK. So, anyone who's been telling me, oh yeah, the EU doesn't want you back, well, seems as a big desire for for this. Anyway, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and of course Donald Trump's election now as US president has now fundamentally changed the context of UK-EU relations. A report by the European Council on Foreign Relations think tank said, saying that there is now a remarkable consensus on both sides of the channel that the time is now ripe for a reassessment of the UK-EU relations, it concluded, with now closer relations being the most popular opinion in every country surveyed. And public opinion on the question is now well ahead of government stances. Based on polling of more than 9,000 people across the UK and the EU's 5 most populous countries, Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and Poland, in the weeks after Trump's election in November, the think tank found that the strongest enthusiasm is now with renewed ties were, of course, in Britain. Perhaps, of course, the most striking, and this is where it gets interesting for us here, the most striking find was that 54% of Britons who voted to leave, including 59% of voters in red wall seats, were now said that in exchange for single market access, they would now accept full freedom of movement for EU and UK citizens to travel, work, and live across borders. This would be because now of the surge in net migration to the UK after 2016 meant that Brexit was now no longer seen by its supporters as the answer on immigration, the report suggested. I agree with that report's findings. I think they are true. And we've said this since the beginning. We've said this since the beginning. Brexit was always going to fail. Always going to fail in some way, shape, or form. You just had to, let it breathe. The further we get away from the pandemic. We're in 2024 now. Can't blame the pandemic. We're in 2024, 2025 next year. Further we get away from the pandemic, less reason to actually blame the pandemic for the UK's economic woes. Hey, we've left Europe. We're no longer having freedom of movement, but now we have the biggest immigration surge we've ever seen. If you wanted to, quote, solve immigration by voting for Brexit and by doing Brexit, well, what's with all these numbers, especially since you had the most hard right-wing government on Brexit under Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, and even Rishi Sunak when it came to immigration. Brexit was sold as the silver bullet. It was sold as the silver bullet by the Brexiteers to solve all of the UK's ills and problems. And it has not. It has not. Time and time again proved that. And of course, whenever people try it, as we saw very recently on Question Time, where Alistair Campbell basically beat Nigel Farage over the head with all the facts and just showed you, yeah, they're not interested in discussing Brexit because they don't want to talk about it, because even Nigel Farage knows, yeah, it's not good to talk about, his precious project. All he has to do is just say, oh, well, it's, quote, not the Brexit I would have done, not the Brexit, we would, quote, we wanted. Again, shifting the blame. Always blame shifting, but Brexiteers have always been blame shifting about the problems for Brexit, since day one. But anyway, let's finish this off. So also amongst UK voters, there were now 68% of respondents would now back freedom of movement in exchange for single market access. They're just 19% opposed, and have now a majority do support among supporters from every party apart from Reform UK, whose 44% of voters also backed the idea. So there you go. A similar percentage, of course, on Britons did support a reciprocal youth mobility scheme for 18 to 13-year-olds, seen now as a key ask for EU leaders in return for improved Brexit deals, but has now so far been resisted by the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Given today's global circumstances, the report said, the UK and the EU should go big and go fast in restoring links, it added. Again, very encouraging. Very encouraging. Go big, go fast. I'd be all for that. It added that the UK and the EU are now both very vulnerable to now prevailing global events, and the reset of relations is now the most effective way to make both sides stronger. It argued that while the EU politicians and officials have now been skeptical about this idea of offering any special terms to the UK, Starmer and his government are now similarly cautious about pushing for improved ties. Public opinion on both sides of the channels now is appearing significantly different from those stances. Amongst British voters, there was a clear support for a close relationship with the EU, with at least 55% saying they would back closer links with the bloc, against 10% preferring more distant ties and 22% wanting to keep things as they were now. This belief was, of course, shared by many Conservative supporters, particularly over the migration and security. But it was mostly Reform UK voters who were the most sceptical about the benefits of a closer links with the EU. But across the EU, polarities were polled in every country agreed. 45% of Germans said they want close relations with the UK, as well as 44% of Poles, 41% of Spaniards, 40% of Italians, and 34% of the French. Well, That's just the French. We have, traditional animosity with each other. But it is, of course, important to recognize that Brexit and, of course, the UK-EU future relationship matters, of course, more to UK respondents than the rest of the citizens of other states. But, of course, there is now broad permission from the UK public and European public to now recast these relations, the report said. There might, of course, be skepticism about special terms for the UK among EU officials and governments, but our poll does suggest that public opinion is, of course, more pragmatic. Both UK and EU citizens, it continued, are now open to having much more ambitious and far-reaching resets than their governments have been envisaging. So again, I think it would be very good to do that. I think Starmer should look at this. I hope they see this, but they will inevitably at some point. I hope they see this. I hope they go for it. I hope this really emboldens them when it comes to talks that we are going to see happen next year. And I am really hopeful for these talks when they start opening up next year. The report also found that, of course, about half of Britons did believe in greater engagement with the EU was the best way to bolster the UK economy at 50%, strengthen security as well at 53%, and effective manage to migration at 58%, tackle climate change at 48%, and to allow Ukraine to stand up to Russia at 48%. And of course, Britain to stand up to the US at 46% and China at 49%. That is true. That is very true. That would give us a very bigger hand in dealing with any crazy stuff that Donald Trump might do, and especially, of course, with China as well. There is, of course, now a similarly widespread backing amongst EU nationals who are allowing some post-Brexit economic concessions in exchange for more cooperation on particularly important areas such as common security. The polling found majority of voters in Germany and Poland, and of course a plurality in France, Italy, and Spain throughout the EU would be willing to make economic concessions to the UK in order to secure a closer security relationship. Majorities or even near majorities were also open to allowing the UK into the bloc's research programs. This could also be extended to the idea of the UK cherry-picking access to parts of the single market, with a majority of voters in Germany, 54% in favour, and Poland, 53%, backing special access. Even in France, the latest is reciprocative to such ideas. At least 41% of respondents said they would back it, against 29% who would oppose it. For EU citizens, the most important reasons were now for working more closely with the UK were to strengthen the bloc's security, especially 40% in Germany, Italy, Poland, and Spain, and of course to stand up to the US and China. Pluralities now in all 5 EU countries said that now greater UK-EU cooperation was also the best way to increase the European economy, ranging from 38% in Spain to 26% in France. To manage migration efficiently, 36% in France to 29% in Germany. Large numbers across the bloc felt that Brexit had been bad for the EU. While some, of course, conservative and reform politicians have suggested that the UK would lean politically towards a Trump presidency at the expense of Europe, this did not seem to be the view shared now by many voters. When asked whether the UK should prioritize relations with the US or the EU, 50% of Britons opted with Europe and only 17% for the US. Europeans were, of course, very similarly reluctant for their governments to now follow Trump's lead. Donald Trump's elections and now Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine have hit the British and European politics like a double hammer blow, said the ERGF director Mark Leonard, who authored the report, saying that the Brexit-era divisions have now faded and both European and British citizens realize they need each other to get safer. Governments now need to catch up with public opinion and offer an ambitious reset. And hey, I've been saying it for a while. I'm all about an ambitious reset. I am all about an ambitious reset. And I think now that if you've got that public backing, great. But if Labour are going to be Ming Va strategy about it and say, not publicly open, we're going to say it until, because they don't, like I say, they've reset relations. They've got good relationship. They've rebuilt those relations, but they don't actually have to say anything about what they want until, they go into that negotiation room pretty much at that point. So we'll see what happens. But I would say now, this polling, which remember, done by a European think tank, is, I think, the most optimistic we have seen in a very, very long time about not only what UK citizens want, and especially Brexit voters would quite happily accept, but also what we see European citizens would also accept as well. I have talked a lot about security on this channel and like how important those like defense agreements would be. We've seen one recently, of course, signed potentially with Germany, although in question, of course, now with German elections coming up, certainly next year. But there are, I think, a lot of opportunities for this, and I think he's really, really up to Starmer, Lammy, and Reeves really to take and seize those opportunities. If they are smart about it, they will seize every opportunity you can, because as that report said, with war in Ukraine and Trump, things have changed. Public opinion has changed dramatically on this, drastically so. And of course, as I said, just after he got elected, we will probably see the now Hurricane Trump pushes back into Port Europe. And I think once that happens, we ain't probably going to leave. We ain't going to leave. So maybe bit by bit, we'll end up back in the European Union. But hey, that's all good as far as I'm concerned. So, as always, let me know what you think down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.